So, okay, so you've written something, or you're wanting to write something. In this process-oriented poetry or prose that I do, you do not start out really knowing what you're going to say, because that would ruin it. You just start writing, and then you arrive somewhere in your little craft, and that's part of the joy of it. But there's also the joy for that other kind of poet of putting things back together. But there's always that question, for whom do you write? In Hawaii, this is a particularly vexing question because I live on Oahu, which is a very small island. There are a lot of people, but you end up all knowing each other somehow. So there are like 1 million people who all know each other. And so writers have families. And families do not want to be put in writers' work. I have my friend Gary Pock, who's a novelist, said his uncle said, if you put me in your book, I'm suing you. And there have been other sort of horrifying stories of writers who've been confronted by their families, right? Or Donovan Collops, whose book I published that Gillian taught in some class or other, he would write a section of his book and then he would leave it out on the kitchen table for the day so that any member of the family could come by and read it, and if they did not want it to see the light of day, it would not see the light of day. Okay, so that's kind of, that's one kind of sort of responsibility to a reader. Or in the case of, let's say you're a native Hawaiian writer, you don't want to write stuff that necessarily, although it might, but you want to do justice to your culture, right? Because so many other people have tried to glom onto it and take it and do something else with it that is unwelcome. So if you're very interested in writing about culture, then I would say absolutely attend to your audience. Although that again, I would say do that during the process of revision or editing, or else you'll never write anything, right? It's like, oh, uncle's in there saying no, and auntie just told me to stop it. So you got to get them out of your head while you're writing your drafts, right? And then you can worry about the effect. But be aware that, you know, you're like the parent of your piece of writing, but like any parent, or like any child, this piece of writing is going to leave, right? They're going to go to college, right? Or they're going to get a job, whatever. They're going to be read by other people, right? So the trick for me often is I really do want to set some sort of effect up for the reader. I don't want to just throw them to the winds so that there's no guidance for them about anything. But at the same time, I absolutely want to resist, and the moral of the story is X, because then you've just turned into an authoritarian writer who will not let the reader make up their own mind. So it's tricky, and it takes a lot of, for me, it's taken decades of practice to know, you know, when did I say too much? When did I say too little? How do I somehow, now that I'm in this piece of writing, how do I get to a point where someone else may share the experience? Because when I was writing about my mother's dementia, I did not want to write the kind of memoir of dementia of which there are too many, which is my parent, my husband, my wife has dementia, woe is me, I have to take care of them. So let me tell you about my day where I take care of this other person who can no longer do this and no longer do that, and it begins to sound a little whiny. Of course it's difficult, right? But if you want your subject to be dementia, you don't want it to be the person who's not got dementia. And so what you do, or what I tried to do, was I tried to set up this field of text where each reader would be, in a sense, submerged in the situation without a whole lot of guidance, right? Certainly not me saying, I now feel like crying, or I now feel really angry, even if I felt those. I just wanted to create that scene, sort of like a photograph, right? So that the reader or listener is there, and they get to have the experience of trying to negotiate this really complicated, sad, anger-making situation, right? So I'd say in that sense it would be a little bit like in poetry there was a school called the Objectivists who were like, what is it with all these poems where the poet says, you know, I saw a tree and it was me, or I saw the field and it was my childhood. It's like, no, 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 no. When you see a tree, it's a tree, you know. When you see a field, it's a field. When you see someone with dementia, it's someone with dementia, which isn't to say you're being impersonal and crude. It's just to say you're trying to pull yourself away from it as the writer so that the reader then has that experience. Okay? The worst part of writing these two books was not in writing them, because the writing was really almost therapeutic. Like I'm sitting in the Alzheimer's home and I'm just feeling completely overwhelmed, so I'll just keep writing. Or I'll keep memorizing what's going on so I can write it later. The worst part was going through and editing it, because then I was the reader. And then I had to go through it all again, except without that ability to write myself, you know, sort of out of it, right? So that's the kind of experience that certainly I'm aiming for. But for me, sitting in that Alzheimer's home is like prototypical. Like you're sitting there, you're listening, you're looking, you're thinking about what form it is, and that I would suggest is what we all need to do as writers. Okay, once you have written and you want to revise or edit, do that out loud. I had a professor in grad school who, I thought this was a terrible insult. I handed in this essay, which was like all over the place. I had no sense of my audience at all. He said, Susan, do you have a plant? I said, yeah. He said, go home and talk to your plant and tell your plant your ideas, and then write them down. I was so mad at him. But I think about that a lot, because often hearing your own voice as you read out loud, hearing somebody else's voice as they read your work to you, that's very illuminating. It's illuminating in the sense of, you know, I want to hear this, but I don't want to hear that, but it's also illuminating in the sense of this just sounds right, or here I am clunking over cobblestones in an Amish cart and it hurts, right? So there are these, that's certainly one way to do it, is to, because we talk about a writer's voice, but we usually talk about a writer's voice on the page. So just bring it up from the page and see how it happens. Okay, then, okay, you've attended to the world. You've written and written and written and written. You've edited, revised. You got something, and it's very exciting, and you want to share it. So then the next question is, yeah, okay, I'm almost finished, is publication, right? So a lot of people will say, how do I get published? And that was certainly what I wanted to be published. For years I wanted to be published, and it didn't work so well. But at this point in my life, having started a small press, my advice is actually, again, to do it from the other direction. Become a publisher. And you can start real small with a website, a Xerox machine, paper airplanes with poems on them. I mean, that's a form of publication. Once you throw it, it's published. Anything like that. And think, what is missing in the literature that I'm reading that I want people to see? What's missing? I will now fill that in. Which writers do I know that would help me fill that in? Please send me stuff. we will make something out of it, whether it's a journal, an anthology, book, whatever. And then everything from stand at the corner and throw your paper airplanes to the Lindenwood Review kind of a journal, but I'd say start small, start cheap, right? So you get the hang of it. And then you meet people. You meet like-minded people. You have things to talk about with these people. Without being crass about it, these people might have a publication too that they might want you to contribute to, right? So that is how I found a community of writers. So anyway, I have gone on along. No. So questions, comments?
About when you like pay attention, like when you see little things, like jot it down, it can become a poem. Well, I've done that. Like I have like little notes in my phone. Like if something happens, I do it. Like for instance, I iron my clothes every night before I go to work. I close my closet. I know that for a fact. I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I came back to get in bed. My closet door was open. I was gonna write a story about it, but I got overwhelmed. So I'm thinking, I wonder if that's possible. What do you do to like de-stress and like instead of throwing it away, like turn it into a poem?
Well, I mean, as I was suggesting, I mean, this doesn't happen to me every minute, that like the doctor incident or these particular incidents I love to encounter with my dog, where I meet somebody and the conversation turns really weird. I love that moment, but it doesn't always happen. So when it happens, it becomes a poem, a vignette, a short story. When it doesn't happen, just hold on to it, right? I mean, not everything is useful. I am not someone who keeps a journal. I often wish I had. If you keep a journal, you can always, you know, those days when you've got nothing to say, you can open your journal and say, oh, closet door open, off you go. So yeah, it can be overwhelming when it's not working, but no, of course it's not going to work all the time. Yeah.
Going along the lines of vignettes, if you're writing a fiction piece and you're creating a scene, and you have a setting, a tropical island, for example, and you have a character, would you suggest as you build the scene, as you flesh it out, that rather than having guided the character, allow the character to have reaction to the vignette or the scene and use that to kind of develop your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a fiction writer. I do nonfiction poetry, I guess you might call it. But if I were a fiction writer, absolutely, I would say you create I would think you would create a scene or a setting that had some sort of complexity, disturbance, whatever, even, you know, whatever it is. And then you've got a character, and I think you might even have met this character on the street before you realize that this was your character. And then, yeah, let that character go a little bit.
This, the second part of that is I'll notice sometimes a character will all of a sudden, no, I don't want to say that. This is what I want to do, and they take off on their own, which is what I strive for. Yeah, no, that sounds great. Because otherwise you're forcing them. Again, you're being the authoritarian author. What's the Flannery, no, not Flannery, the At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, which is, I don't really remember it except that it's a book in which the characters take over the author, so there's a fear to that too, but I'd say that's a good plan.